Boom, here we are. Welcome to another Data and API show. This is your host, Adrian, and we have Sid and Praveen with us today. They're going to talk about Gatsby, and I'm going to disappear in a moment. But before I disappear, just remember, feel free to chat, ask us questions, things like that. I'll be in chat fielding answers if I can. If not, we'll get one of these fellas to make sure that you get an answer. Also, if you want to extend the conversation beyond the show today, we have, let's make it pop up. Discord, you can join. So join us on Discord and talk about architecture, ask questions, posit thoughts and ideas on what you yourself are building. So with that, I'm going to let these fellas take over, and I'm going to shush and join a chat. So you two have a blast, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you build. Cheers.
Thank you. Hey, Praveen.
What's up?
What's up? Good to see you again.
Yeah, I think back with the collaboration again. So we're gonna do a
When was the
similar
last time we
thing.
met?
Yeah, this was 2 weeks
was
back.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we did this really cool thing with Hasura events and Gatsby functions, right?
Right. Yeah, so I
What
was
are we doing
thinking
today?
we'll probably do something similar with Gatsby functions, but probably use Hasura actions maybe. We can see how we can take that forward.
Awesome.
And
Let's do it.
I saw that Gatsby recently also launched V4 Alpha, and that would be pretty exciting to try out later as well, possible.
Yep. It's a beta,
And with
not an
yeah,
alpha.
okay, yeah, and
Whatever that means. And
yeah,
we should totally try something out.
different rendering modes, I suppose, like server-side rendering, and pretty exciting to try that out
Yes,
as well.
Gatsby V4 now has SSR. We also have something we call DSG, which is SSG but deferred, on demand. And we've got a bunch of other stuff under the hood, including PQR. You can now run queries in parallel in a bunch of different threads. So that stuff is a lot faster. We'll talk about that as we go. Let's do it.
Right. Awesome. So for today, I think we'll create a simple Hasura project, create some tables, have some data integrated with Gatsby. But on the front end, on the client side, probably we'll use some fetch API to write some queries, and then eventually use the Gatsby function itself to leverage Hasura actions or events. Awesome.
Yep.
So
Let's do it.
let me just share my screen. One sec. Yeah. Let me zoom in a little bit.
Yep.
Cool. So
that's
I'm going to
Hasura
create.
Cloud.
Yes, this is Hasura Cloud, and
Okay.
I'm going to create a new project. Let's say Gatsby Func. I hope the name is available. Should be, yeah. And I've created it in the US West region for the free tier.
Right.
So this is getting initialized. So we have the GraphQL API on this project name .hasura.app is the domain, and then you get a v1/GraphQL, right? So that's
Awesome.
the default API.
Awesome.
So yeah, I should have probably created one on the Mumbai region because
That's all
we're
right.
both based out of
A little
India,
bit of
and
latency.
yeah,
Yeah.
considering that we
Yeah.
both are from India, and this yeah, a little bit of latency around
That's all
here.
right.
Yeah,
That's okay. No worries.
and
So what do we
and
do next? Do we set
so
up?
yeah, and I just wanted to ask before we move on. I think on the cloud functions that Gatsby has launched, how long has it been? And I think it's been pretty recent, right? And what's been the story around that?
Sure, absolutely. It's actually been a while. Cloud Functions are have been in production for a couple of months now, and
Mm-hmm.
it started out as an RFC a
Mm-hmm.
long time ago. In fact, I'll go ahead and link to that RFC. And over
Yeah.
time now, we've seen a lot of usage. We've seen a lot of people trying it out. We've gotten a lot of great feedback. We have been improving things as it goes, and Yeah, I've just linked to the RFC in the private chat. If you can share that in the comments. Cloud functions are on Gatsby Cloud. You can try it out right now. Gatsby V3 and Gatsby V4 both support them, and yeah, we'll be using them today. So you'll learn more then.
Awesome. And meanwhile, we've got the Hasura console running here. So this is the console that we used last time. So this is the cloud console. On the open source as well, you'll get the very similar interface except for the monitoring tab, which is available on cloud. Right. So the first step would be for us to connect to some data source. We don't have any data sources connected right now. So we're going to use Postgres. And we're going to make use of Heroku Postgres tier for the free database. They have a pretty good integration, which Hasura gives you an instant Postgres database connected to your cloud project. We've just done a one-click integration. I already have an account, so it's pretty instant for people. But otherwise, also Heroku's account is free to sign up, and Postgres is also free to create. Right? So that's awesome. So we've got the database connected. This is a Postgres database. This is the public schema. So let's go ahead and create some data models for the app for today's use case. What do you suggest? We'll use users. We'll just create a set of users and then we'll go from
user
there.
Signups again, I guess.
Yeah. So we'll do ID, which would be some auto-incrementing integer, and we'll get, let's say, probably the email of the user, which is of type text. This is all just Postgres data types that you typically use. And we can probably even use frequently used columns, which is created at, which has a default value timestamp. I'll just collect the primary key as ID, and then I'll click on add table. Pretty standard stuff. We create a table, and we've got the columns.
So this is going to create the table in Postgres and also make it sort of visible over GraphQL. Hasura
exactly.
Make sure you can do CRUD in it. Very cool.
Right. So this is just a UI layer for you to manage your Postgres database. But typically, if you have an existing Postgres, you can also bring that in, and then Hasura will be able to read the tables from your database and then give you APIs over the tables. So on the left, if you can see here, we already have the users table that we created. We've got the fields and whatnot. Obviously, the data is empty, so this is going to be empty response. But let's try out like a mutation to probably like insert a user.
Nice.
So we'll just need the email for now. Let's say I'll start with mine, and I hope
because the ID is going to get auto-incremented.
And creator will have a default timestamp. Right. So that's the idea behind this. And I'm going to click on this play, and we've got the ID one that's inserted right now. So this is the automatic mutation that happened, the API. We've just made a query, and if you can go back to the users, we've got the values over here.
Nice.
Awesome. So let's replicate this on the front end with Gatsby, right? With a form.
That's a great idea.
So I'm going to initialize like let's say a Gatsby project. This is the right
so npm
command.
init Gatsby will run. It is. That is the right command, and that will give you a really nice, wizard. Let you pick, CMSs. In our case, we don't need any. Yeah, you can skip all of that.
But there's a good boilerplate to set up if you have some markdown to be set up and some React helmet and stuff. So
the wizard will install all the plugins that you need. It'll make sure all the config is set up correctly. It'll not only npm install the plugins, but also add them to your Gatsby config, so stuff just works. So it's pretty useful when you're starting out.
Right. And like pretty commonly used modules in most cases. So in this example, we'll just use probably like a fetch API. So I think we're good with that. So I think as typically npm install takes time, let's look at other stuff around this. Right. So this query that we made, the mutation that we made, was made with an admin secret. So by default, this API is not open to the public, because it has to be secure, right? So this admin secret is the one which is preventing anybody from accessing this directly. But we also
Right.
want to be able to allow users to insert into this table from the front end without any secret
Right.
keys and whatnot, right? So that's why
Right.
we have something called permissions. So we'll go to
Right.
users. We have something called permissions in Hasura, which lets you define roles and define operations for all of these. So this is like a public role. Anybody in the public can do an insert or a select of this table. In this case, we
So
want to
does
do a
Hasura come
mutation.
with a public role when you start out, or does it only come with the admin role?
It will only come with the admin role. This is a role that you custom
Okay.
define. Yeah, you can name
Right.
it whatever you
Makes
want,
sense.
and yeah, we'll just name it public here. And for
Okay.
inserting into the users table, we are going to not have any checks. We are just going to let the user insert without any conditional checks, and we let them insert the email value alone, because ID and created at
Okay.
will be automatically generated in the database. So we don't
That
need to
makes
allow
sense.
them to do this mutation. And I'll click on save permissions. So we've allowed access for insert. We'll also now set up select permissions, allowing access for all
So
three columns.
why do we need access for the select permission? Let's talk about that.
Right. Right. So if you're making a mutation which returns a value, which returns, let's say, the ID or the created at timestamp, which is auto-generated in the database, you might need the ID on the front end for, let's say, a unique key
Right.
that you have in the HTML. In that case, you will
Right.
need a select in the response. So
Okay.
and you need to define a permission for that to be able to work. So we'll
Okay,
have to
but
define
does this mean that someone will be able to hit my API to get to select all user IDs, or can we sort of limit that by just how would that work?
Right. So if you're authorized, if you have like an authentication system in your app, like let's say you have a user login in place, in that case, you will not be obviously having without any checks. You will have some custom checks around by saying, hey,
Ah.
this ID of this has to equal to this special variable called Hasura user ID. And this value will
Right.
come from the auth token, the access
HTTP
token that
headers or the auth
yeah,
token?
the auth
Okay.
token,
Okay. Okay.
which you send into the authorization barrier token typically from your front end.
Very cool. Very
Yeah,
cool.
and this is processed from your JWT. If you're using JWT, it will have your claims, which will have this value.
Right.
So Hasura will be able to
Got it.
parse that value and then apply this in the permission layer when the query is made.
That makes sense. That's super
Right.
cool. So for now, we're gonna skip that and we'll just go without checks.
Yeah,
But
we're just going
like in
to.
production, you don't want to do that.
Yeah, we
Obviously.
don't want to do. You don't want to expose even the email probably, even for right now. We just want to allow access to the ID and probably timestamp of when it was created.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense.
And that's it. So we've allowed permissions
And we're
for
not gonna
select
give access.
for
Okay.
update and delete.
And we're not gonna give access for update and delete because obviously we would not need that, right?
Yeah, right.
On
And
the front end.
and because you've not given this access, the mutation itself wouldn't be available on introspection. If a GraphQL introspection is made to this API,
Oh.
these these nodes won't be exposed for the end user to even try it out. The documentation will not be there for them.
Interesting.
So now that we've defined the permissions, what I can do is I can remove this Hasura admin secret that we've defined. And it says, again, it still says that there's no schema on the left. Now the next step is to let Hasura know that, hey, I have defined this role called public. This is an unauthorized role. Anybody can access this data. So give me access to that kind of role, right? So I'm going to add a new environment variable called unauthorized role, which indicates Hasura that, okay, this is the role that anybody will use without any restrictions as such. Basically, you don't
Got
need to
it.
send an
And
access
that's how
token.
Hasura knows that Got it. Got it. Very cool.
Right.
And you mentioned that introspection would not show me mutations that I don't have access to. That's pretty cool because that then implies that based on my auth headers, like the introspection response is different based on whichever user is seeing
Exactly.
it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's super cool. That's very cool. Nice. Nice.
Right. So just to refresh that response, yeah. So I've now removed access to admin secret. Now on the left, we can see that there's an insert users mutation that's available. And if I probably can try out a query, which, okay, out a query. Yeah. On the query side, we can now access only created at an ID. So I won't be able to even
Nice.
access the email. This is not auto-completing for me. It's already throwing an error, right? So
Because the type doesn't, wow,
doesn't
wow.
exist.
So it even
So it,
creates those types based on oh wow, so it generates those types like at runtime effectively
exactly.
based
Yeah,
on which role that you're querying with. Very cool.
exactly.
Very cool.
Yeah, right. So yeah, so this is the permissions layer. So we've set up permissions
Okay.
that are required for our app now on Gatsby, and I hope this is ready. Obviously. All right, so let's run this app. Let's do npm run develop. Oh, I think I should probably go into Gatsby
Gatsby
Funk.
Funk, is it? That's the
Yep.
one. There you go.
Then run
Perfect.
this.
Perfect.
And I think on my VS Code, I have this project running. Let me zoom in a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
How about a tad more? You want to zoom in a little more?
Yep.
Maybe one more level.
Yep. This
Okay, that's
should
good.
be fine. Yeah. Yeah, awesome. So what we're going to do is we want to replicate this mutation on the UI. So this will be the mutation that we'll
Yes.
try out. Let's also define a name for identification. Let's say
Let's
insert
do it.
user, right? And potentially a variable, but let's come back to that
We'll
later,
come
I
back to
think.
that. Let's
Yeah.
bootstrap our form and try to
Yeah,
figure out how we'll get our users to sign up.
right. Awesome. So I think, yeah, let's run the initial app. My system is
Yep.
acting up clearly in terms of
It's
running
probably
a
because
simple
of the
screen
it's
shares.
probably because of the screen share and the streaming
Yep.
stuff and whatnot, right? Oh well,
So
no
yeah,
worries. So we
this
can
is a
probably throw out
standard
a bunch of that
hello
stuff,
world
right?
stuff, right? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
I'm gonna zoom out a little bit to
So
understand what's
when
happening.
you yeah, that's a good idea. So when you initialize a new Gatsby project, you get a nice, pretty homepage. In fact, you can visit it right now and take a look at it if you like.
Yeah.
But of course, you don't need all of that stuff when you create your own app. I mean, you don't want to have links to Gatsby documentation. So feel free to delete all of that. You can also delete the links above and the styles, given that we're not going to be using
Yep.
any of that. So let's get
Yep.
rid of all of that.
Right. I've seen the default hello world image that comes up and links to some guides. It's pretty
Yep.
cool. Um, we don't need any
Hat
of the
tip to
CSS. Just going to
Max for
remove all
writing
of
all of
them.
that. Yep. Yep.
Right. This is still probably taking up some time. Let me.
So I think that's because
Right.
we hit save. Oh, there you go.
Yeah,
There
it's
you go.
recompiling. It's recompiling
There you
page
go.
styles. Yeah.
So we're going to get rid of back in our back in VS Code, we probably want to get rid of the style tag on the main, right? Because we deleted page styles. So let's get rid
Right.
of that. So that's right there. There you go.
So we probably don't even need the style prop.
Yeah, that's fine. We don't want to. We can live with plain HTML for now.
Right.
Let's get rid of that. Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah, this should finally build it.
So while that
This would probably be
happens, we
running
have
on
a.
localhost 8000, I suppose.
Yes. While it's running, we have an interesting question in the chat that I want to ask you because I haven't seen that stuff before either. Someone mentioned would love to see you work with relationships in Hasura. So maybe we can get to that. Like after we get our form up and running, maybe we can talk a little bit
Yeah,
about how relationships work in Hasura. That would be
right.
interesting.
Yeah, totally. So typically, I think in most applications with multiple tables, you will have some sort of relationship between two different tables, and you would want to query them in a single query instead of making multiple API calls. And that's the power of
Right.
GraphQL, right? Where you actually define a nested query and not make multiple round trips to fetch data. In fact, this will be pretty useful for a relationship query will be pretty useful for like building a static site with Gatsby where for a particular page, you want one query which access data from multiple tables, and that one page will just populate static data from different tables in one shot. So in your build time, you will probably write this query which will just work.
Makes sense.
Um,
All right. Awesome. We can go back to our browser. We can go back to VS Code and we should see a title. There you go. We see homepage up on the title bar. I think we only had a title. We only had a title.
Oh, yeah. Oh, all right. Yeah, I was just
So
looking for something else after
it makes
deleting
sense.
everything.
That
Yeah,
happens.
Hasura plus Gatsby. Let's see if this
Alrighty.
is working out as expected. Yes, I'll just
There you
zoom
go.
in this bit. So
There
we've
you go.
got
We're
a
done.
very
That's how you use
name-based.
Hasura with Gatsby.
Yeah, end of stream. Let's move on to other fun stuff. Right. So we'll start with the form then, I think.
Yeah.
So we'll do like a form which will have, oops, my editor is acting up a
Probably
little bit
want an
weird today.
input, right? You probably want an input
Yeah,
tag and maybe a button, I guess. That should be helpful.
yeah. We need a value. Let's keep it empty for now. We'll come back to that. And this is,
That's good enough.
yeah. And finally, like a button, which will have type submit.
Yes. Perfect.
Let's just call it submit, maybe.
Yep. That works. You want to change so the input is for our email, I reckon. So maybe we
Okay.
can change the type to email.
Yep. So have some validations which will happen by default.
Perfect.
Right. So we can see the form coming up. Right. So for the input value, we probably need some state. Right.
Yes.
So we will import use state, I suppose. So
yes.
we'll do import.
So you can do star as React, and then you can just do React.useState. That works fairly well.
Yeah, I just typically prefer this one.
Whatever you like.
And let's define email and email. It should be use state, and default will probably be empty string.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
And let's set the value to the email.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Yes.
So now the next step would be to write like a on submit for the form. Or in fact, as you type
Let's
in
write an
the
on change
input,
handler. Yeah.
yeah, we'll do on
Let's update
change.
our state.
We'll do event. we need to set the value of email. So we'll do set email, which would do event dot target dot value.
Yes. And that's going to set the React state as the form input changes. And then we were able to use the email value at line 6.
Right.
Perfect.
So let's test that out.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just do, yeah, I think as you keep typing in, this value keeps updating. So I think everything should work. Let me also test it out by, I don't think we need to verify this. I think this is already working, because if you've given the value as email, I think this is already working as expected.
Correct. That's a
right, so
controlled React component. And since you set value to email and since it actually updated as you typed, we know that that works. So I guess we can move on to the on submit.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
So we'll do on submit, which will be like a function that we'll write, submit handler maybe. Write a function for on submit. So let's define a function over here. Say submit handler takes in event prop, and let's do some logic over here, which will do some API calls eventually. But let's start with like a console to say submit button clicked.
Yes. And we probably want to prevent the default. That's something I always forget.
Yep, it always happens. Yeah,
I always.
And then the page refreshes.
Right?
Yeah.
Correct, because the browser doesn't. Because the browser does the. You want to do
prevent
default. You want to do event or prevent default.
Yeah, I think that.
So your browser thinks the default thing that you want to do when you submit a form is to send a post HTTP request.
Post request, which will be a slash question mark followed by the params that you typically have.
Exactly. Yep.
I think this was from back in the day, and the spec hasn't changed. Anything around that?
Yeah. In fact, Remix uses that to its advantage, and sort of you can write forms in Remix with actions, and it just works, and it uses that logic out of the box. So it's really cool. So we have a quick question in the chat, which I'll bring up while you take a look at that. Do we really need to import React explicitly? I haven't worked with Gatsby before, but I have worked with Next.js, and I never did that explicit import. Right. So if I recall correctly, some new version of some Babel transform takes care of that import, and you no longer need to. To be honest, I haven't even tested it out with Gatsby lately, but I bet you don't really need to do that import. I would try it out though. I wouldn't take my word for it. I would try it out because I haven't tried it out. So I would try it out. Yeah, and if it doesn't work, then no issue, and we will fix it.
Yeah, and I think it's but anyway, I think you probably import hooks like use state, use effect and stuff React, in which case you will probably write that import anyway at some point.
Correct.
Just a matter of adding another React import. So the submit button clicked worked as expected. So things are moving. The next step would be to now write a fetch API, which will make a call to this mutation, so that we get the data inserted into the DB.
Yes.
So let's define this mutation. So let's call this mutation. I'll just put this over here. And this will probably not
and now
be.
You want to probably add a variable, right?
Variable, yeah. So we can do, there are a couple of ways to do this. We can obviously use the template query string, which is not recommended. We can actually use the native GraphQL variable. So the way to do it is you define the variable when you define the mutation at the beginning. So let's say you say $email, which would be of type string in this case. And instead of this raw string value, you will just substitute this with email, right? So this is
at the bottom. I think you can set them, right?
You can
There
set
you
the
go. Yeah.
variables. Yeah. So we'll test this out over here. So we'll do email. All right, my thing is hanging up, I guess. Yep.
No worries. No worries at all.
Right, so this is $email. Let me define
Dollar
the
email,
variable.
which is string and it's required.
Yep.
There you go.
This
Perfect.
is done. So the mutation has been defined. We are returning the
Perfect.
ID and what. So this is all fine.
Mm-hmm.
So when you write the fetch call, then I think we
Mm-hmm.
will need the endpoint that we want to call for. So let's do response.
So where do I get the endpoint in Hasura Cloud?
Yeah. So this the API Explorer will have it over
That's
at
the
the
one.
top. So the project name /v1/GraphQL. If you're using the typical GraphQL endpoint, we're using a relay endpoint, which should be v1/relay, which is a different endpoint. We're using a relay client
Got it.
on the front end.
Got it. Got it.
I'm going to use fetch followed by the URL, and I can pass in the options object, which would have like the method. So, so the common misconception is that GraphQL requires like a fancy client to make queries or mutations, which is not the case. GraphQL is just most GraphQL implementations just use like a fetch, like a HTTP post request to handle the queries and mutations, and subscriptions is what will require like WebSockets. So you can just use your native HTTP client like Fetch or Axios or any library wrappers to make this API call. Just wanted to call that out. On the headers, we will just do content type. This would be like a JSON request body. So we'll do headers. And finally, like a body, we will send like a stringified JSON, which would have
our query.
Query. So there are three keys to this, right? I think there is operation name, there is query, and there is variables that GraphQL accepts typically. In this query, we'll have like a mutation, which is the constant that we defined above for the mutation. So we'll pass that, and we need to also send the variables for this particular example, and
we have it right there on line 11.
Yeah.
So we can just set email. Perfect.
We can even use the shorthand notation.
Yep.
Oops, one sec.
You need to wrap that with.
Yeah. So we are sending in the variables. The body is just JSON stringified version, and that's it. And we'll need to process this response, which would be to say, let's say resp, and let's do console.log of resp and see what the response look like.
Let's do that. So I think one thing we need to do is run JSON, exactly. And I think response.json returns a promise, so we'll need to await that. So let's go ahead and let's make that, let's return it and then maybe use it in another deno, or make that.
Or I think we can do a simple. We can probably do an async function, which makes it easy for whole
that
process.
That works.
And we'll do an await over here. Yep. Do an await here, and even here over here, I can do another await.
Yep. We don't need the deno anymore, right? So now we can just do await response.json. Nice.
Oops. Yeah. So final response. I'll do an await.
Mm-hmm.
response.json.
Lovely.
And let's do like
You're
a
gonna love
final.
that.
Yep.
All right.
Awesome. So
Sweet.
this looks fairly done. Let's
Looks
test this
great.
out.
Yep. Yep.
Let's go back to localhost. Let's refresh this.
Mm-hmm.
So I've already included mine, so I'll probably use somebody else, maybe Sid, so
Yeah. Go ahead and use
that
mine.
people can find you.
That's Gatsby.js.
Is it
Yeah.
right?
Sorry.
Is the right one.
I never check my email anyway. It's fine.
Right. So I've submitted this. We have like a post request that's happening,
Look
and
at that.
we have
Look
a
at that.
positive response. We have an ID to come
That
back.
just worked. And we
Yeah,
didn't need to pass any header for authentication because you set public as the role for like the anonymous users that send
right.
you requests without any of these. Nice. Very cool. And that just worked. Look at
Yeah,
that. That's great.
we've got the email over here. So the mutation happened.
Fantastic.
Awesome. So
Awesome.
the next bit, the important bit here is the Gatsby function and how relevant
Mm-hmm.
is this in this use case. So let's say we have
Mm-hmm.
submitted this data to the DB, but
Mm-hmm.
I want to perform some action post this insert. Let's say I want to call another
Mm-hmm.
API to
Mm-hmm.
send an email or whatever functionality, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
need an API handler to be defined in events. So Hasura has something called events, where
Mm-hmm.
in fact, if I just quickly show you, you can select the table that you want to define an event on. Let's say the users table
Mm-hmm.
that we've created,
Mm-hmm.
and trigger operations on, like, let's say insert or an update or delete, and then call a webhook handler, which is like a HTTP post endpoint. What Hasura will do is it will send the user data uh, to this webhook URL whenever there is this operation that you've configured happens. In our case, we want
Very
to
cool.
call insert every time you do an email submission from the front. The primary use
Nice.
case probably would be when you're submitting this data from the front end, but you want to send like an email in the background as a non-blocking action. You get an instant response here, but then the email gets sent later in a queue type. Right, so that's probably the primary example for events. We can
Yep.
use an
That
event
makes sense.
for this use case. So let's go
Mm-hmm.
ahead and define Gatsby function to get started.
Yep.
And I think
Yep.
this
That's
is
a
the
good idea.
Gatsby functions. Yeah. So so what do I need to create? I
So
need to
for our
create a
event, we'll need right. We'll need an API, right? And the idea
Mhm.
with Gatsby functions is to be able to build these backend like APIs, but in your Gatsby project, right? And
Yep.
it's simple. The way to do it is you just need to create like you have a pages directory for your pages. Just go ahead and create another directory called API, which is
Is
adjacent
it
to
Will
pages.
it
So
be
within
inside pages or is it at the top level of SRC?
no, it'll be at the top level of
Inside.
SRC. So it'll be adjacent to pages. There you go, right there. Yeah,
Okay.
just go ahead and say new folder API. And
Mhm.
now, whatever JavaScript or TypeScript, Gatsby supports TypeScript out of the box. So whatever JS or TypeScript files you put in there, you'll get HTTP endpoints right out of the box. Right? It works locally when you run Gatsby Develop. It even works on Gatsby Cloud. In fact, it also works on I think Netlify and a couple of other providers. I reckon support has been added over time. And
Mhm.
yeah, it's really simple. I mean, all you need to write is we've all used Express at some point, right? In our
Yep.
journey in Node.js land. And Gatsby functions look like Express handlers. They get a request and a response object, and the API is really similar. In fact, it's a subset of the Express API. So I see that Praveen has gone ahead and written
Just
up a
copy the
Gatsby
hello
function.
world example.
Lovely. And perfect. That's a great like hello world. If you go ahead and try to post that, you'll get a 200. So let's try that out.
I suppose even like The endpoint would be probably localhost 8000 / whatever file name that I've given here, right? It will be Hasura
Exactly,
hyphen.
exactly,
So
exactly. It's
slash
always the
API.
file name of the file.
It's
Yes,
probably
and
API
you'll want a
slash.
slash API.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's what it is. And out of the box,
Bottom the
Gatsby
follow
will
what?
listen. Yeah. Out of the box, Gatsby will listen on any HTTP request, right? So if you noticed, Praveen sent a get here via his browser, right? You just sent a get request. A post request would also work. And the reason we let these functions listen on every request is because the user gets to control that. And the way to control that is inside your function, you can look at request.method and either send back a response saying this method is unsupported, or go ahead and do what you want to. In this case, I think we're fine, so we just keep it the way it is. Let's go ahead and write our function. What do we want to do in this case?
Right. I was thinking we can just first output the request body that comes from Hasura, and then probably even
Mm-hmm.
see what's happening with that. Let's do
Mm-hmm.
rec.body, I suppose. That's the typical way you handle request bodies. Can I
Yep, let's
send
do
back
that.
the same request body that I've received?
Absolutely
As,
yes. Absolutely
so I
yes. Go ahead and just
can,
set request. Yeah, just go ahead
I
and
can
set
just
body
do,
to request.body.
yeah.
Perfect. There you
So
go.
to try this out, um, what I probably also need is so on Hasura, if you want to add like an event trigger on a cloud project, you need a public webhook URL, right? Which means this localhost URL will not work. I can have either like probably something like an ngrok, which will expose this, or
Yeah, like a
probably just
reverse proxy.
reverse proxy, or probably just deploy this to like your Gatsby Cloud and then get an endpoint, right? I think I
Yeah,
probably going to,
that'll probably be the fastest and easiest way to do it. So
yeah,
just go
easiest
ahead
way.
and push.
So
I see
let's
that you
do,
already have Gatsby Cloud opened up. Such a
yep.
pro.
I was, uh, I was pretty, I wanted to start off with like a starter kit that Gatsby Cloud probably tells me to start with the wizard that you give, right? So um, let's do init SSR. I had to create a git repo. I also have that ready. Let's give
Lovely.
this Gatsby Funk.
Alrighty.
Hasura. This is a public
Perfect.
repo, so let's create this repo. And I'm just going to copy this remote,
Mm-hmm.
push this origin. So let's do git push origin master and yeah,
There you go.
refresh this. Right, so I have this on a public repo, so which means I can probably now instantly deploy this to Gatsby Cloud because I can either
Yep.
start from a template or like import from a Git repository. So I'll just
This
connect to
whole thing
my
should take very little time. Yeah, let's
right.
go ahead, connect to GitHub. Maybe
Unless
spend a minute
my
and we'll have a build.
internet acts up, I think this should take 2 seconds.
You're in
Yeah,
Bangalore. The internet's better there than it
yeah,
is in Bombay.
yeah. Right. I think probably it's probably today the odd day. Um, so I've
What
started the
part of Bangalore
repository.
are you in?
Yeah, I live in HSR, which is also
I
pretty
know where
good
that is.
place. Yeah,
That's
and
nice.
I think today I think it's been the slow system, not the internet, with the screen share and stuff, which typically doesn't happen. But I think,
No worries.
yeah,
So everything there
right. So
looks
I have,
good. I see the site name. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. Should I just change this? I don't know. Okay, oh, yeah, it was probably already this with the
Whatever you want.
branch name. So base directories wherever you typically have the Gatsby Gatsby app, which is the default here.
Mm-hmm.
So let's do next. It's loading some integrations. All
Right.
right.
So
So
with
how do
Gatsby Cloud, you can connect to a bunch of CMSs automatically, right? And the idea here is that you can click connect, it'll open Contentful another tab, you can log in and it'll automatically set up the integration, your env variables will sort of come over, etc. In our case, we
mm,
don't really have any CMS that we've connected
mhm.
to, so we can skip
Right.
this step. But
Right.
in most cases, if you're starting out a site, you have a CMS.
It will be a
That's how
blog
this
which
is
will
the way.
import from these integrations. And do you think like a Hasura integration will make sense here for people to quickly set up some
Absolutely. I
ENVs?
think absolutely. I think we should talk about it. Let's
Yeah,
take that after this call and talk about it. I think that's a great idea.
awesome. Yeah. So I've skipped that step for now, and I think we don't have any environment variables also for this particular use case. I'm going to click on create site, which is going to just start building the site.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
There you go.
So this is on the free tier, which I think works for all of these dev setups, I suppose. Dev and staging.
To be fair, though, the free tier is really. I mean, it's pretty gracious, and I say that without bias. You can serve up to 100 gigs of bandwidth for free. In fact, my a bunch of sites that I work on a personal level, like I have my course that I'm working on. The site is hosted on Gatsby Cloud, and I don't pay for it. But I get the best, first class, hosting powered by Fastly or on, a lot of edges over the planet, very low latency, and it can handle a lot of traffic. As you can see up on the top right, you can do up to 100 gigs of bandwidth,
Yep.
25,000 invocations for Gatsby functions, or 5 million requests in a month across your workspace. And typically, I mean, unless you're building something really large, you can get away with that. But do use it more than that and give us your money. That would be nice.
Yeah. Yeah. I think once you run in production, will make use of the Gatsby Cloud's fast build times, I think, because that's probably like a um, big added value for Gatsby Cloud compared to what you can
Yeah,
do.
that's what we're known for.
Yep.
And
Yeah, I think this is
again,
getting
Gatsby
pulled.
hosting.
Mhm.
Gatsby hosting is enabled by default for every site you create. So this site that you're creating right now will get
Mhm.
a URL hosted on Fastly, on Gatsby hosting, which is powered by Fastly. By default, you don't have to enable anything; it just works. In fact, you'll also get those functions. As you can see, it's compiling our Gatsby functions right now, and it'll serve those on that URL as well, right?
Right.
So just out of the box, all you need to do is git push, create a site, and everything just works. Let's go ahead and wait for this build to finish, and then we can use our URL.
I think the URL is probably from the previous. Yeah, this is probably the URL which we'll be probably using once the app is ready.
Let's go ahead and copy that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think whenever that's ready, we'll get the hello world. Yeah, it says still configuring, which is fine. Right, I think this is built. So let's probably refresh this. And we've got the Hasura Gatsby thing coming over here. I'll zoom in a bit. Right, so this is already done. I think what we need to worry about is the API layer, which is API / event, if that's the API.
That is.
So
API
this
/ Hasura event, right?
Yeah, so this is the API endpoint that we want to use in our event trigger. So let's say send email is a trigger name for the public users table. For every insert that happens, we call this webhook URL, which is Gatsby Func Hasura / API / Hasura event. We can configure settings like retry and stuff, but I think we can skip that for now.
Oh, that's cool. That's very cool. So if the HTTP endpoint returns back anything other than a 200 or a 20x, you can do retries.
You can
very
do
cool.
retries.
Very cool.
Yep. And
very cool.
And probably even Gatsby lets you configure alerts in the future where something is getting 400 for a pretty long time. You can check it out. Probably have some Slack notifications. Yeah, that's probably the whole event pipeline that you can have for to rapid building. Cool. So
for now, you can take a look at. Let's open our logs on Gatsby Cloud because I think you had a console log in there, right? So we should be able to see that log.
So I
let's
just
go ahead and open our build.
Right. This was recently built. Is
and
this raw
functions.
logs? Oh yeah, functions. We were doing
Yes.
functions. It says I didn't include any functions in the build.
So it looks like interesting. That's interesting. Let's find out why. So we do
Mm,
have, what version of Gatsby are we running with? I mean, I'm pretty
This
sure we have support for
should be the
this.
latest, I suppose. I think yeah, this is 3,
And
3.13.1. Which
interesting. Let's go back to Gatsby Cloud and okay. So I'll tell you what
I,
we
I
want to do.
still
Let's
have
go
like a
go ahead and
I still have like a query
mhm.
which because I have a doubt whether this API folder is at the top level of SRC or with inside of pages. I've always had this doubt.
That's a good question. I always get confused about that as well. But a good way to
That's
test that is
oh
that
yeah,
when you write
so
Gatsby develop locally, yeah, it is. So
yeah,
when
I
you write
think the
Gatsby
docs
develop
mentioned
locally,
this. Hmm.
right, and you were able to hit the API, right? I mean, the API worked. So I'll tell you what. Let's go ahead. Let's go back to our URL and let's try to hit that URL right now and see what happens. I think on your fourth tab, you had the API. Let's go ahead and hit that API. What does it do? Does it exist?
Yeah, it returns me the empty body. Yeah, it does
Interesting.
exist.
So it does exist. We just didn't show the logs there for some. That looks like a front end bug. Oh boy.
Hmm.
We'll get on that one.
Awesome. So should I just refresh
Yeah, go ahead and hit
or probably do
refresh and
another
let's see
build?
if that shows up.
Yeah,
Go
could be
ahead and hit
probably a state bug.
refresh.
Mhm.
Yeah, I bet this is probably just the front end acting up. We'll
Like a
get
front
that
end single
resolved.
page application. Yep.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna go
let's click on
back to
that.
this.
Hmm.
This is definitely my slow system. Uh,
Don't worry
yeah,
about it.
this is
It's all good.
functions. Yeah, we have the
Okay,
Hasura
so it
event coming
shows
up
up
here.
now. Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is
So I bet
basically,
it's
I think, a
probably
UI.
because, yeah, it's a UI bug. It probably wasn't an
Yeah,
invocation and whatnot. Look at that though. We do see the invocation with the log. So now let's get it triggered from Hasura Cloud, right? And how are we doing
exactly.
that?
We can call it from the Gatsby app because we've done a mutation integration, right? So
Perfect.
what we can do is I can do Praveen plus one, which I typically use.
Hmm.
This submit should have first. Let's confirm it one by one. Let's see if the data has
Hmm.
come in. We can see that the data has
It
been inserted.
has.
Let's go to events
Hmm.
and verify if the event has been processed. It
Look at
has
that.
been delivered. And let's just
Look at
look at
that.
logs as well. Let's look at the response. Yes, I
Yep,
think
we
we've
got back the
gotten
entire request.
Gatsby hosting. So the headers are there. Everything seems to work. So let's go to Gatsby Cloud, and there you go.
Perfect.
So
Look at
we've
that.
gotten
Look at that.
the event details.
Look at that. It works.
Awesome. Yeah, finally, I think um, this was pretty easy. We didn't really write much code for this to get this working. This is just simple
Yeah, it's nice
echoing out
how
the.
how much. Yeah, it's nice. I mean, in the real world, you'd probably want to do stuff like send emails and whatnot, right? But
Yep,
it's
yep.
nice to see how easy it is to hook up these different services and have this
Mhm.
sort of evented architecture where you do a mutation in Hasura or in your GraphQL, and that happens to trigger something which happens to be a function which is in your Gatsby set. It's very cool to see that entire sort of machine work together so well. Very, very cool.
Awesome. So I think this is also pretty interesting because previously, without functions, I think what Hasura developers had to do was they have tried their own Express server and host it somewhere for their custom logic stuff, right? Tried their events
Yep,
and action. But now their front
yep.
end is already Gatsby, but now with functions, you can just keep using Gatsby and then just extend this with functions, write your custom code, and just stay with one particular app, and then probably deploy to Gatsby Cloud and get everything running in one shot. So this is pretty cool.
Absolutely. And it's all production ready. You can have really any kind of traffic that you hit on it. We do have Fastly in front of these. So if you set the right cache control headers, Your function responses will also be cached. You get a world-class CDN and sort of production hosting for all of these. And really nothing stops us from being able to build an entire backend and just a bunch of serverless functions, right? You can do that too with something like Hasura, which gives you a really powerful GraphQL API out of the box with no work almost. With that and a couple of functions sprinkled in there, really that's all you need to build a modern web app these days. It's pretty incredible that you can do that.
Totally. I think for some of the use cases for which you need custom logic, for example, with Hasura, like for this mutation itself, for example, before inserting an email, you probably want to do a validation of the email on the server side. You can set up Postgres constraints, but also if it becomes like a complex validation, you can make use of a Gatsby function, which actually does the validation before doing the mutation to Hasura. So it can act like a middleware for your GraphQL API. And the way you can do that is through something called actions, right? So
Oh,
what actions
wow,
does?
that's so cool.
So what actions does is you can define a GraphQL query schema and the types that are associated with that. So you can have like a query. So let's say very simple example. Let's say type query, and let's say user, and let's say you give it an argument called ID, and this would be of type integer, and let's say it returns like a string, for example, like a very naive example, and we don't have any fancy types. Here you can give it a handler, which is again a post HTTP post endpoint, a REST API. But if you are making this query to this, so let's say, for example, I'll reuse the same function. The function was probably API/Hasura event, right? So let's call this handler and
Interesting.
let's create.
Very cool. Okay.
Yeah, string is not a. Let's do
Oh,
user output, and let's define a user output. So let's do ID int, and I think this should probably work. Yeah, so you've got the action created, and let's test this out pretty quick. So query. Okay, we need to allow access, right? So this doesn't have permissions. I'm going to enable admin secret.
go for it. Yeah.
We have fetch user ID, which returns an ID. And if I make a query, obviously this is going to give an error, but it would have typically triggered another invocation in Gatsby function.
Oh, that's super cool. So you're saying that you can add effectively custom function, I mean, custom code to, for your GraphQL API. It could be mutations, it could be queries, it could be anything. But those could then go ahead and call some other code.
Yeah, and this could be written in Gatsby functions, and it could be serverless.
That's super cool.
Right? Yeah,
that's super cool, man. I didn't know you could do that. That's super cool. Is this new in Hasura, or have actions been around for a while?
No, actions has been around for like more than a year, and this has been a pretty commonly used custom API stuff, right? So
awesome.
The use case here is that you still have REST APIs, existing REST API that you want to convert to GraphQL. You don't want to rewrite them.
Yes.
So you can just map your GraphQL
sort of
types.
Wrap them.
Yeah, wrap the REST API to your GraphQL type, right? So
that's super cool, man.
Yeah. So the exciting bit is
you can even build a sort of right. You can even build a sort of gateway, right, where you call multiple APIs, and they're all sort of. That's super cool. Very cool that you can do that.
Yeah, you can create multiple actions, and then each action will have its own Gatsby function handler, and it becomes serverless by default for you, and you write functions for each custom logic.
Very nice. And then your front end can just use GraphQL to call it.
Exactly. So in fact, the same fetch user query can be triggered from your Gatsby front end app. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, I learned a bunch today. This was great. Thank you, Praveen. I mean, I didn't know about actions in Hasura. I've
Mhm.
used Hasura before, but this is some really cool stuff that y'all are doing. Great work, and thank you for walking me through all of this.
Awesome. So I think that's probably the end of the stream, unless we have questions from the audience. Let's look at Adrian. Adrian will bring us some questions.
Aiden's back.
Adrian is on mute if
That's how I live, on mute. I like to just talk to myself as much as possible. So yeah, enjoyed the stream from my little silent corner of the universe too. This has been great to see you two wire all this together. I also live tweeted your whole process. So when you go out to Twitter and you see like 20 tweets with your names on them, that's what happened. Just don't have a heart attack or anything. So on that note, thanks everybody for watching. Again, if you have questions, comments, etc., bounce out to our Discord. We're happy to talk about architecture, design ideas, what's coming down the pipe. If you have questions, we always endeavor and will find the answers for you. It just might take a little bit. And of course, I know the Gatsby crew, not to speak on your behalf, but the Gatsby crew also has a lot of mediums. So if you're chasing down some answers about that, definitely find Sid. He's in that Twitter stream, so go follow him.
We also have a Discord. Let me post a link to it.
Give me the Discord. We'll post it up here live, and people can have that too. Let's see.
Right. This is the prettier URL.
I was gonna say these URLs. They're always so like I see them, and my first response is that a safe URL to click on? So there we go. Gatsby.dev/Discord. Don't click on questionable URLs, folks. So with that, again, thanks for watching. Everybody have a good one, and happy hacking.
Thank you. See ya.
Thank you. Bye-bye.